I never believed people could become monsters that fast. Not until I spent one night trapped inside a quarantined apartment building during the COVID lockdowns. And what happened in that building still keeps me awake years later, because there was no ghost, no creature, no shadow lurking in the dark, just ordinary people. And that's what makes it worse. March 2020. The city had become unrecognizable. Empty streets, boarded up businesses, the constant sound of ambulance sirens echoing through neighborhoods that used to be alive. I lived alone in a 12-story apartment building downtown. Most residents kept to themselves, but everyone knew everyone well enough to nod in passing. At first, quarantine felt strange. Then it felt normal. Then it started feeling like prison. Days blurred together. Weeks disappeared. Nobody left unless they absolutely had to. Nobody trusted anyone. Every cough became a threat. Every elevator ride felt dangerous. And then someone on the 7th floor tested positive. Within 2 days, 3 more cases appeared. The building management sent notices telling residents to remain inside their apartments. Health officials arrived. Yellow tape blocked entrances. The entire building was placed under emergency quarantine. Nobody in, nobody out. That's when things started changing. Not because of the virus, because of the people. The first incident happened 3 nights after lockdown. Around midnight, screaming erupted somewhere below me. I rushed to my peephole. Other doors were opening too. People peered into the hallway. The screaming continued. A woman's voice, terrified, desperate. Then suddenly it stopped. The silence afterward felt worse. The next morning, building management sent an email claiming there had been a medical emergency. Nothing more. No explanation, no details. Just those 2 words, medical emergency. People started asking questions in the building group chat. Nobody received answers. Over the following days, paranoia spread faster than the virus. Residents accused one another of being infected. Neighbors photographed people through windows. Others reported hearing coughing through apartment walls. People became obsessed. One resident posted a list naming apartments he believed were hiding symptoms. Another started recording anyone who entered shared hallways. The chat became vicious. Every conversation turned into accusations. Fear transformed ordinary people into something ugly. Then food deliveries stopped arriving. The city had staffing shortages. Drivers refused to enter quarantine zones. Within days, residents began rationing supplies. Arguments broke out online. People fought over shared resources. Someone stole packages left outside doors. Another resident was caught taking groceries from a hallway delivery station. Nobody trusted anyone anymore. And then the power went out. It happened just after 2 a.m. The building plunged into darkness. Emergency lights flickered weakly. The hallways glowed red. For several minutes, nobody knew what happened. Then rumors started. Someone claimed maintenance workers had abandoned the building. Someone else said utility crews refused to enter quarantine areas. Nobody knew the truth. The uncertainty was worse than the darkness. Hours later, emergency generators restored limited power. But something felt different afterward, like the building had crossed an invisible line. People were no longer neighbors. They were competitors, threats, obstacles. A week into quarantine, I woke to loud pounding, not on my door, across the hall. A man named Kevin lived there, mid-30s, quiet, worked remotely, never caused trouble. The pounding continued, then shouting, several voices, angry voices. I looked through my peephole. 4 residents stood outside his apartment. One held a baseball bat. Another carried a crowbar. My stomach dropped. Kevin opened the door slightly. I couldn't hear everything, only fragments. "You got tested. Tell us the truth. You're putting everyone at risk." Kevin looked terrified. He kept shaking his head, trying to explain, trying to calm them down. Then one of them shoved the door open. They forced their way inside. The door slammed shut. The hallway fell silent. I stood frozen, listening. Minutes passed. Then I heard furniture crashing, glass breaking, Kevin screaming. I called the police. So did others. Nobody came. Emergency services were overwhelmed. The operator sounded exhausted. She took information, promised to send someone. Nobody ever arrived. The noise eventually stopped. Hours later, the group emerged. They walked back to their apartments without saying a word, like nothing had happened. The next morning, Kevin's door remained closed. No movement, no sounds, nothing. 2 days later, I finally saw him. He exited his apartment carrying trash. His face was swollen, one eye completely shut. Deep bruises covered his neck. I asked if he needed help. He stared at me for several seconds, then quietly said, "They thought I was infected," and walked away. The quarantine lasted another week. Things continued getting worse. People formed groups, picked sides, targeted anyone they considered suspicious. Rumors became evidence. Fear became justification. Nobody wanted to be the next target, so nobody spoke up, including me. That's the part I hate admitting. I stayed silent because I was scared. Everyone was. Eventually, the quarantine ended. Health officials declared the outbreak contained. The yellow tape disappeared. Life slowly resumed. Residents moved away. The group chat vanished. People pretended nothing happened. Kevin left first. I never saw him again. 6 months later, I received an unexpected phone call. A detective wanted to ask questions about the quarantine period. Apparently, Kevin had filed a report, not about the assault, about something else, something they found afterward. During the investigation, police recovered messages from a private chat created by several residents. The people who attacked him had never believed he was infected, not once. They knew he wasn't sick. They had targeted him because he lived alone, because they thought he had supplies, food, medicine, cash. The virus had simply given them an excuse, a justification they could live with. The detective told me something I'll never forget. One message sent before the attack read, "Nobody will care. Everyone's scared of getting close to him anyway." Years have passed. COVID became history. The building still stands. People still live there. New residents, new faces. Most have no idea what happened on that floor. But sometimes I think about that night, about how quickly civilization disappeared when people believed they had permission. Not permission from the government, not permission from the law, permission from fear. Because fear can make people do terrible things. But what scares me most is realizing those residents weren't driven insane by quarantine. They weren't possessed by panic. They weren't victims of some mass hysteria. The private messages proved something far worse. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they enjoyed having an excuse to do it. That's the lesson I learned in that quarantine building. The virus wasn't the most dangerous thing trapped inside with us. We were. The worst thing COVID took from me wasn't a family member. It was my ability to trust strangers. This happened in 2020, during the height of the lockdowns. I was 26, living alone, working remotely, and barely leaving my apartment except for groceries. Every day felt identical. The news was filled with death counts. Hospitals were overflowing. Everyone seemed scared of everyone else. One afternoon, I got a call from a local volunteer organization. A woman explained that they were helping vulnerable people who couldn't leave their homes. They needed drivers to deliver food and medicine. I signed up immediately. It felt good to have a purpose. For weeks, I delivered supplies across the city. Most people were elderly. Some would wave through windows. Others left thank you notes taped to their doors. Then I received an assignment that still keeps me awake. The address belonged to an elderly man named Walter. According to the paperwork, he lived alone and had severe respiratory issues. I picked up his groceries and drove across town. When I arrived, something felt off. The curtains were closed. The mailbox was overflowing. I knocked. Nothing. I called the number listed on the file. No answer. I was about to leave when the front door opened a few inches. A man stared at me through the gap. He wasn't Walter. He looked to be in his 40s. messy hair, bloodshot eyes. "Can I help you?" he asked. I explained I had groceries for Walter. The man paused, then smiled. "He's resting. I'll take them." Something about his smile bothered me. I asked if he was family. His expression immediately hardened. "Just leave the bags." I should have walked away. Instead, I glanced past him into the house. The living room looked destroyed, furniture overturned, boxes stacked everywhere. And for just a second, I thought I heard someone coughing deeper inside the house. The man slammed the door. I reported the interaction to the volunteer coordinator. She sounded concerned and said she'd make a note of it. A few days later, I was assigned to Walter's address again. This time, the same man answered. Same smile, same bloodshot eyes. But now there was a bruise across his forehead. "Walter still resting?" I asked. The man's smile widened. "Getting weaker every day." Something about the way he said it made my stomach turn. I left and immediately contacted the coordinator. She told me Walter had never listed any family members. Nobody should have been living there. The organization attempted to reach him directly. No response. A welfare check was requested, but police departments were overwhelmed during COVID. It took days. 3 days later, I got another assignment, Walter's address. I refused it. Something felt wrong. The next morning, I received a call. The coordinator sounded shaken. Police had finally entered the home. Walter was found alive. Barely. He had been trapped in an upstairs bedroom. The man answering the door wasn't family. He was a drifter Walter had allowed into the house months earlier. At first, he helped with chores. Then he slowly took over. During lockdown, he realized nobody was visiting. Nobody was checking. Nobody was watching. He stole Walter's bank cards, intercepted deliveries, controlled phone calls, kept him isolated. When Walter became too weak to fight back, the man simply moved him upstairs and started living in the house as if it belonged to him. The overturned furniture I'd seen? Walter had tried to escape. The coughing I'd heard? That was him. Still alive. Still trapped. Police later discovered the man had been cashing Walter's checks for months, using his money, buying alcohol, gambling online. Meanwhile, Walter was surviving on scraps. The part that haunts me most isn't what happened. It's what almost happened. If COVID hadn't overwhelmed everything, if volunteers weren't stretched thin, if police had responded sooner, maybe Walter would have been rescued earlier. Or maybe not. Because the terrifying truth is that the drifter never hid what he was doing. I saw him. The delivery records showed him. Neighbors noticed him. Multiple people felt something was wrong. But the chaos of the pandemic created the perfect cover. Everyone assumed someone else would handle it. Walter survived, but he died less than a year later. And sometimes I think about those 3 deliveries. I remember hearing that cough from somewhere inside the house. I remember the man's smile. And I remember driving away. Because while everyone was afraid of catching a virus, an old man was trapped inside his own home with a predator, and nobody noticed until it was almost too late. The worst thing that happened to me during COVID wasn't the sickness. It was realizing how cruel people could be when they thought nobody was watching. In 2020, I took a temporary job at a hotel that had been converted into an emergency quarantine facility. People who tested positive or were waiting for results could stay there instead of exposing their families. The work was exhausting. Every day felt the same. Ambulances arrived, guests checked in wearing masks, meals were left outside the doors. Most people were scared, lonely, and grateful for any kindness. Then a man checked in. He looked normal enough. Mid-40s, clean-cut, soft-spoken. He smiled constantly, but something about it felt forced. The first strange thing happened on his second day. A young nurse reported that he kept finding excuses to keep her in his room and asking unnecessary questions, pretending he didn't understand instructions, trying to start personal conversations. Nothing serious enough to report, just uncomfortable. A few days later, another nurse complained about the same thing, then another. Eventually, everyone avoided being assigned to his floor. One evening, I was working the front desk when a woman called in tears. She was his wife. She said she hadn't heard from him in 2 days. I transferred the call to his room. He answered immediately. A minute later, he came downstairs, furious. He slammed both hands onto the counter. "Why would you transfer her call?" I was confused. "That's your wife." His expression changed instantly. The anger vanished. Then he smiled. "I know." He walked away. The next morning, housekeeping found something disturbing. The man had covered the peephole on the inside of his door with tape. Not unusual by itself. But around the peephole, he had written notes. Dozens of them. Names, descriptions, work schedules, physical features. Most belonged to female staff members. The hotel manager contacted authorities, but technically, he hadn't committed a crime. So all they could do was document it. A week later, he checked out. Everyone relaxed. We thought it was over. 3 months passed. Then one of our nurses disappeared. She didn't show up for work. Nobody could reach her. Police eventually found her safe at a relative's house several states away. When investigators interviewed her, they discovered she had been receiving anonymous messages for weeks. The sender knew where she lived, knew where she shopped, knew what shifts she worked. The messages never made direct threats. They simply described her daily routine in disturbing detail. She became so terrified that she packed her belongings and left overnight without telling anyone. Police traced several of the messages. The trail eventually led back to the same quarantine guest. The man had spent his entire stay collecting information on staff, listening to conversations, watching schedules, taking notes, building profiles. Investigators later discovered he had done similar things elsewhere, always staying just inside the law, always careful enough to avoid arrest. As far as I know, he was never charged with anything major. And that's what scares me. People think the most dangerous individuals are obvious. They imagine someone violent, unpredictable, and easy to spot. But the truly frightening people are often patient, polite, smiling, the kind who make you question your instincts. Years later, I barely remember the endless masks, the testing lines, or the fear of getting sick. What I remember is that man standing at my desk, smiling, not because he was happy, but because he knew exactly how much information he had collected about all of us, and he knew there was almost nothing we could do about it.